The Galactic Confederation had spent years negotiating with the Terrans. No one really called them humans anymore, not after their rise to power. They were Terrans, the descendants of Earth, a planet that had once been a small blue speck among countless others in the Milky Way. Yet now, the Terrans were something else entirely, more than just a race of highly evolved primates. They were the architects of civilization as the galaxy knew it. Or rather, they had been. The Galactic Council, a body of representatives from various species, had grown accustomed to their leadership. It had become a matter of routine. Every 3 years, they would meet in the sprawling, imposing halls of the Galactic Summit, surrounded by alien species of all shapes and sizes, each one more bizarre and terrifying than the next. They would discuss trade deals, technological exchanges, and the occasional military action, but there was always one constant: humans. Or Terrans. The species who, despite their relatively short time among the stars, had mastered everything from diplomacy to warfare with an unsettling expertise. And for the last few years, the Terrans had shown an unsettling trend. They stopped attending the negotiations. It wasn't a grand statement. They simply stopped showing up. The rest of the galaxy had learned to adapt, of course. They'd managed to patch together a few deals with Terran intermediaries, allowing them to continue trading. But without the Terrans at the table, things were starting to crumble. The deal that the Galactic Confederation had been trying to push for the last 6 months, the one that promised to end the war with the Xr'Keth, the insectoid species that had been ravaging the fringes of the galaxy, was failing. No matter how much they offered, no matter how many concessions they made, nothing could get the Terrans to return. And so, in a move of desperation, the Council had invited the Terrans' last ambassador, the ever-strategic and infinitely resourceful Commander Aiden Hawke, to discuss matters. They hoped that perhaps a single human, one who had been to the very edges of their empire, who had led armies, negotiated peace, and saved entire star systems, might convince the Terrans to reconsider their absence. They needed a Terran in the room. Because everyone knew that if the Terrans walked away for good, the galaxy would fall into chaos. The room was buzzing with murmurs as Aiden Hawke entered, his boots clicking loudly against the polished floor. The alien representatives, each one seated at their designated positions around the enormous circular table, watched him with a mix of curiosity and anxiety. They knew why he was here, and they knew that without his intervention, things might just spiral completely out of control. Commander Hawke was an anomaly among his people. He was born into a family of diplomats and strategists, but he had never been content with traditional methods. While most of his peers pursued peaceful resolutions through political channels, Hawke had become known for his unconventional, and often uncomfortably direct, approach to problem-solving. He was an expert in playing the game, but he was also more than willing to throw the entire board over if it meant the stakes were high enough. As he strode toward the center of the room, his gaze swept over the council members. There were the towering, translucent JLYX, whose antennae twitched nervously in the presence of a human. The Xr'Keth, their mandibles clicking in what could have been interpreted as a nervous tick. The glands, amphibious beings who exuded a constant hum of psychic energy, their emotions far more open to perception than any of the others. And of course, the Virali, the stoic, armored species whose faces were perpetually hidden behind a reflective visor, making it nearly impossible to read their thoughts. "Gentlemen," Hawke began, his voice calm but with an edge of authority that made everyone in the room pause. "Ladies. I must admit, I'm rather surprised you've invited me here. After all, it seems like you've been getting along just fine without the Terrans. What's changed?" The room fell silent. The chairperson of the Galactic Council, a being with 8 flexible limbs that resembled a cross between a cephalopod and a lizard, cleared his throat. "Commander Hawke, we are facing a crisis. The Xr'Keth are growing more aggressive by the day, and we can no longer negotiate with them without your people's expertise. You are the only ones who have ever been able to successfully broker peace with them. We need you. We need the Terrans." Hawke raised an eyebrow, but his expression remained unreadable. "And yet you didn't need us before," he said, his voice thick with irony. "The Terrans have been quiet for years now. You all figured it out on your own. Why come crawling back to us now? The chairperson shifted uncomfortably. It's not that simple. The negotiations were stalling, Commander. Our diplomatic channels have reached an impasse. The Xr'Keth are making demands that are simply not feasible, and without your people's presence, we risk losing everything. Hawke took a slow, deliberate breath. He knew exactly what they were asking. It wasn't just about the Xr'Keth anymore, it was about the larger power balance in the galaxy. The Terrans were too important to be sidelined, and now, after years of trying to go it alone, the Confederation had realized how essential they truly were. But the question lingered in the air, unspoken: would Hawke, or any Terran, be willing to step back into the fold? I don't see why I should help you, he said flatly. The galaxy has spent years treating us like an afterthought. You took us for granted. I can't simply come back because you're in trouble now. A murmur spread throughout the room, a mix of frustration and realization. This wasn't a negotiation in the traditional sense. Hawke wasn't just another diplomat. He was the one who had led the Terrans to their current position, one of indomitable power, not only in military might but in intellect. He was the one who had shown the galaxy that diplomacy wasn't just about talking, it was about power. One of the Virali representatives stood, his voice gravelly, as if it had been centuries since he had spoken aloud. You misunderstand, Commander, he said. This isn't about us asking for your help. It's about you showing us why we should have never underestimated you. Hawke didn't respond immediately. He allowed the silence to stretch between them. Then, with a faint smirk, he turned on his heel and addressed the council directly. Let me be clear, then. I'm not doing this for you. I'm doing this because your mistake has become too costly for the rest of us. And with that, the room fell silent again, the weight of Hawke's words sinking in. The stakes had never been clearer. The Terrans, for all their power and influence, had stepped away from the negotiating table for one simple reason: they were tired of being the galaxy's go-to solution. For years, they had been called upon to fix every problem, resolve every conflict, and clean up every mess. The galaxy had learned to rely on the Terrans, and for a time, they had been the ones to solve the issues of the galaxy. But now, the Confederation had pushed too far, and the Terrans had taken a step back, leaving everyone to fend for themselves. Commander Hawke wasn't interested in saving the galaxy. But, like it or not, the galaxy was about to learn a very painful lesson: sometimes, you don't realize what you have until it's gone. The comm buzzed softly on Commander Aiden Hawke's desk, a gentle reminder of the escalating tensions outside the secure walls of his personal cruiser. He had avoided the chaos of the Galactic Council chamber, but the universe, it seemed, wasn't going to let him simply walk away. The situation with the Xr'Keth, the warlike insectoid species at the heart of the galaxy's most recent crises, was deteriorating faster than anyone had predicted. He leaned back in his chair, staring at the data projections blinking across his desk. The Xr'Keth had launched another series of attacks on the edge of the Confederation, targeting mining colonies and resource transport lanes with increasing brutality. Reports of entire fleets being decimated by the Xr'Keth's guerrilla tactics poured in every hour, and the once flawless trading routes, vital to the galaxy's economy, were rapidly becoming a war zone. This wasn't just another one of those political crises the galaxy's leaders had learned to ignore, this was something much worse. The Xr'Keth weren't just testing their borders, they were systematically dismantling the Confederation's fragile control over its peripheral systems. This wasn't about territory anymore. This was about a shift in the balance of power, a shift the Council had failed to see coming. Hawke's fingers drummed absently on the edge of his desk. Despite his usual calm demeanor, he could feel the weight of responsibility creeping in. He had no interest in stepping back into the mess that was the galaxy's politics, but the truth was unavoidable: if the Terrans didn't intervene, the galaxy might collapse under the Xr'Keth's relentless assault. The Confederation had ignored the signs for too long. They had grown complacent, assuming the Terrans would always be there to fix things. Now, that safety net had been pulled away, and the galaxy was on the brink of implosion. But Hawke wasn't ready to rejoin the fold just yet. The ship's AI interrupted his thoughts. Commander Hawke, I've received a transmission from Counselor Drassel, requesting your immediate attention. Drassel. The name sent a jolt of irritation through Hawke. Drassel had been the one who had pushed hardest for the Terrans' inclusion in the Council, but now, with things falling apart, he was the one who had begged Hawke to return. How quickly the galaxy's leaders had turned from arrogant to desperate. Still, Hawke had given his word that he wouldn't get involved, not unless it was absolutely necessary. He closed his eyes for a moment, weighing his options. Put it through, he said, his voice resigned. Drassel's image flickered to life on the screen. The counselor's long, scaly neck twisted in a slight bow of respect, though his eyes were filled with barely contained urgency. His species, the Gorteri, were known for their stoic demeanor, but even Drassel wasn't immune to the growing panic in the galaxy. Commander, he began, his voice strained, we are at the precipice. The Xr'Keth have launched another coordinated attack, this time on the station in the Kalthar system. It's only a matter of time before they start targeting core worlds. I know, Hawke replied flatly, eyes scanning the battle reports flashing across his terminal. What do you expect me to do? The Terrans walked away from the table for a reason. I understand that, Commander, Drassel said, his voice dropping to a lower, more measured tone. But this situation has become untenable. We need your expertise. The Terrans are the only ones who have ever been able to hold the Xr'Keth in check. Without you, without your people, we can't stop them. Hawke paused. He had predicted this, a moment when the galaxy's leaders would realize they had no one else to turn to, no other species capable of navigating the delicate web of intergalactic diplomacy and warfare the way the Terrans had. But even as his rational mind acknowledged this truth, something else stirred in him. A resentment, a lingering bitterness at being treated as the galaxy's crutch. The Terrans were the galaxy's solution to every problem, but the moment they withdrew, they were treated like the problem. I told you all that the day would come when you'd need us, Hawke said, his voice growing colder, but you didn't listen. You didn't take us seriously when we said we were done. Now, you want us back because the Xr'Keth are tearing apart your precious trade routes. Drassel's expression faltered, but he pressed on. Please, Commander. The galaxy is slipping into chaos, and the Confederation's entire foundation is at risk. We need the Terrans. We need you. Hawke exhaled sharply, rubbing his temples. It was tempting. More than tempting, it was a chance to prove a point, to show the galaxy that the Terrans had never truly been expendable. But what would that accomplish? More dependency? More exploitation? He would never be able to answer these questions unless he took action. But did he really want to return to the same position he had once rejected? Still, something gnawed at him. The Xr'Keth weren't just causing chaos for the sake of it. This wasn't their typical behavior. No, something had changed. And if the galaxy couldn't see it, then maybe he had no choice but to find out for himself. I'll do it, Hawke said finally, his voice laced with reluctance. But understand this isn't about saving the galaxy. This is about making sure that the next time something like this happens, you won't take us for granted. Drassel's eyes widened with relief. Thank you, Commander. You don't know how much this means. You'll know soon enough, Hawke muttered, turning to his console and beginning to prepare his ship for departure. The first stop was the Kalthar system, the flashpoint for the latest wave of Xr'Keth aggression. Once a quiet, prosperous trading hub, the system now lay on the edge of disaster. The Xr'Keth had attacked the main space station there, leaving a trail of destruction that had already claimed hundreds of lives. The reports from the Confederation Navy painted a grim picture. The Xr'Keth were spreading like a plague, infiltrating every corner of the system, overwhelming the station's defenses with sheer numbers. Hawke's ship glided silently into the system, its sleek form cutting through the void like a shadow. He scanned the transmissions from the station, listening carefully to the frantic pleas for help, the desperate cries of civilians caught in the crossfire. But there was something in the data that didn't sit right with him. The Xr'Keth weren't simply attacking, it was as if they were probing the station's defenses, testing every weakness with a frightening precision. He wasn't just dealing with mindless aggression. Someone was orchestrating this, someone with a plan. As he approached the station, Hawke's tactical display lit up with new information. A squadron of Xr'Keth ships had just breached the station's last line of defense. They weren't trying to capture the station, Hawke realized, they were trying to destroy it. He pulled his ship into a sharp turn, cutting through the chaos of battle. The Xr'Keth ships were everywhere, their sleek, insectoid forms darting through the debris, launching missiles and firestorms at anything in their path. Hawke's fingers flew across his controls, deftly evading enemy fire while simultaneously issuing commands to the station's fleet. "This is Commander Aiden Hawke," he spoke into the comms, his voice steady. "Everyone, fall back to the secondary defense grid. I'll handle this." The voice of the station's commanding officer crackled through the static. "Commander, we can't." "You can," Hawke interrupted. "Now, get your people to safety. I'll buy you enough time." With that, Hawke launched his ship into the heart of the battle, weaving through the incoming fire with terrifying precision. His ship was a blur of speed and maneuverability, dodging explosions as though it were second nature. As he made his way deeper into the fray, he noticed something strange. There was no sense of chaos among the Xr'Keth ships. They weren't scattered, fighting for survival. They were organized. A realization struck him like a cold slap across the face. This wasn't just an attack on a station. This was a diversion. The Xr'Keth were drawing the Confederation's forces away from something bigger. The question was, what? But Hawke didn't have the luxury of figuring that out just yet. He was already in the heart of the enemy fleet, and he had a job to do. The tension continued to rise as the situation escalated. The Xr'Keth had grown more aggressive, and Hawke was starting to understand just how serious this was. There was something hidden beneath their attack, something far more dangerous than anyone realized. And with every passing moment, the stakes grew higher. Hawke's eyes narrowed, his grip on the controls tightening. It was time to find out what the Xr'Keth were really after, and he wasn't going to let the galaxy burn before he did. The hum of the ship's engines blended with the distant crackle of the comms system, but Commander Aiden Hawke couldn't focus on either of them. His mind raced through the implications of the Xr'Keth's attack on Kalthar Station, the strange precision behind their movements. There was no longer any doubt in his mind that this wasn't an ordinary raid. The Xr'Keth were coordinated, deliberately so. Every strike had been calculated, every maneuver crafted to draw attention away from something more critical. And now, as he danced through the heart of the Xr'Keth assault on the station, evading missiles and laser fire with practiced ease, it was clear that he wasn't just playing defense. He was being drawn into a game with stakes he wasn't yet fully aware of. This wasn't merely about repelling an attack, it was about uncovering what the Xr'Keth were really after. The ship's tactical displays flared to life with new data, tracking the Xr'Keth ships and the debris scattering through space. Another transmission came in, this time from the station's defense commander. "Commander Hawke, we can't keep this up. Our energy reserves are almost depleted, and the fleet is losing ground. The Xr'Keth are pulling back, this doesn't make sense." He ground his teeth. "It's a diversion, Commander. They're after something else. I need you to focus on getting your people out of here. The station can be rebuilt, but your lives can't." Despite the rising panic in the commander's voice, there was a grudging acceptance of Hawke's orders. "Understood, sir. We're starting evacuation procedures. But what about you?" "I'll handle it," Hawke said curtly, his fingers dancing across the control panel, pulling the ship into a steep dive through the dense cloud of debris. His mind worked quickly as he pieced the puzzle together. The Xr'Keth weren't just attacking the station, they were testing a new weapon. It was the only logical explanation. The way they had coordinated their fire, the way they systematically targeted vulnerable spots, there was something hidden beneath the surface. His ship's AI chirped in his ear. "Commander, a significant energy pulse has been detected at the station's core. Estimated time to detonation, 3 minutes." Hawke's heart skipped a beat. "Get me the station's reactor feeds, now." He could hear the frantic typing of the technician on the other end of the comm data coming through now. "Oh no. Explain it to me, Hawke ordered, his pulse racing. There's a bomb. A massive one. The Xr'Keth planted it deep within the station's core. It's designed to overload the reactor. If it detonates, the entire system will be wiped out. A cold sense of realization hit Hawke like a freight train. The diversion wasn't just to distract the Confederation, it was to set off a cataclysmic event that would cripple the region. And worse still, if that bomb detonated, it would create an energy pulse powerful enough to send shockwaves throughout the nearby systems, enough to destabilize the Confederation's entire outer defense grid. The Xr'Keth weren't just after territory. They were after control of the entire region. How long do we have? Hawke's voice was tight, the situation now urgent beyond measure. The technician hesitated. 2 minutes. Hawke's mind clicked into overdrive as his ship rocketed towards the station's core. The clock was ticking, and every second counted. He wasn't going to let the Xr'Keth win, not this way. Not when he had the chance to do something about it. The station loomed ahead, a fractured shell of what it once was. Its once pristine hull was now riddled with gaps and scorch marks. A sprawling field of wreckage and debris floated in its wake as Hawke pushed the ship's engines to their limits, forcing his vessel into an impossible series of evasive maneuvers through the wreckage. But Hawke wasn't just dodging fire anymore. He was thinking faster than he ever had before, piecing together the puzzle with the resources he had at hand. He wasn't just a soldier anymore, he was a strategist, a tactician, and most of all, he was the last line of defense for the Confederation. His mind raced as his ship began its approach to the station's central reactor core. He needed to disable the bomb, but it was buried deep within the station, protected by layers of security systems and environmental hazards. Hawke had to get in fast, and he had to be precise. Activate the cloaking device, he muttered to himself, fingers dancing across the controls. Cloak engaged, the AI confirmed. The ship disappeared from the sensors, its outlines now indistinguishable from the debris field around it. Hawke's heart hammered in his chest as he approached the station's core. He knew this was a one-shot opportunity. If he couldn't disable the bomb in time, the entire region would be destroyed. Inside the station, the chaos was palpable. The evacuation procedures were moving at a breakneck pace as civilians and military personnel alike scrambled to escape the impending disaster. The station's lights flickered, its life support systems struggling to keep up with the strain. And in the midst of it all, Hawke found himself inside the station's central security hub. He had arrived just in time. The bomb, an advanced piece of Xr'Keth technology, pulsed ominously within a secure chamber. The walls around it were reinforced with thick alloy plating, and the clock was ticking down relentlessly. Hawke had no time to waste. He accessed the terminal and began bypassing the security systems with practiced ease, overriding protocols and hacking into the station's network. His heart pounded as the seconds slipped away. The countdown was now at 30 seconds. Come on, come on. He muttered under his breath, frustration creeping in. His fingers moved with lightning speed, finally unlocking the security lock on the bomb's containment chamber. Then it hit him, the Xr'Keth hadn't just designed this to destroy the station. They'd built it to send a message, to the Confederation, to the galaxy. They wanted to show the universe what would happen if the Terrans didn't return. They wanted to demonstrate just how vulnerable everyone was without the Terrans watching over them. Hawke's hands froze over the terminal. He could see the bomb's internal systems now, its intricate wiring and failsafes. It was a marvel of alien engineering, deadly, but clever. It was designed to make sure no one could disarm it without triggering the countdown. And in that moment, he realized, the Xr'Keth had accounted for everything. Except for one thing. Commander Hawke, the AI interrupted, its calm voice cutting through his thoughts. You have 10 seconds remaining. His mind snapped back to the task at hand. He quickly scanned the remaining interface options. A series of wire connections glowed in red around the bomb's core, and he could see the detonator in the center of it all. He didn't have time to carefully disarm each individual circuit. He needed a shortcut, something fast. With only 5 seconds left, Hawke's fingers blurred across the interface, using his knowledge of alien tech to reroute the detonator's core function. He initiated a complete shutdown sequence, a reset of the internal protocols. It was risky, but it was his only shot. The countdown ticked down to 1. Silence. A sudden surge of energy washed through the station. The power grid stabilized, and the light flickered back to life, a subtle hum of relief spreading through the room. The bomb had been deactivated. Hawke let out a breath he didn't realize he had been holding. His hands shook as he wiped sweat from his brow. The disaster had been averted, for now. But as he stood in the heart of the station, looking at the now dormant bomb, something gnawed at him. The Xr'Keth had been one step ahead, and they had shown him the first move of a much larger game. And now, it was his turn to make a move. As the dust began to settle, Hawke turned and exited the control room, his mind already racing ahead to what would come next. The war had just begun. The hum of the station's auxiliary power systems filled the silence, but Commander Aiden Hawke barely noticed. His thoughts were miles away, racing ahead to the task that loomed before him. The bomb had been disarmed, but the larger threat of the Xr'Keth's machinations was far from over. As he exited the control room and made his way toward the main hangar, his mind whirred with calculations and contingency plans. The Xr'Keth had just shown their hand, and that was only the beginning. They had something bigger planned, something Hawke had yet to uncover. The air around him crackled with the tension of a battle temporarily won, but far from over. The station's survivors had begun their process of evacuating to safer locations, and the wounded were being triaged and hastily set up medical bays. But Hawke's focus remained solely on the larger scheme. The Xr'Keth weren't fighting for territory anymore. They were fighting for influence, to tear down the Confederation's fragile control and cast the galaxy into chaos. His comm beeped, pulling him out of his reverie. The voice on the other end belonged to Counselor Drassel. "Commander, the news has already begun to spread. The Xr'Keth are retreating. For now. The Confederation's forces are moving in to stabilize the Kalthar system. But we still don't know what the Xr'Keth are truly after. They're organizing for something far more dangerous." Hawke paused. "We have a problem, Counselor. They're playing a game, and we haven't even started learning the rules." Drassel's tone was measured, as always. "What do you mean?" "I mean this isn't about mere destruction. This is about control. The Xr'Keth are testing the waters. They want to see if they can break the Confederation, drive a wedge between the systems, make the galaxy beg for our intervention." There was a long silence on the other end of the comm, and for a moment, Hawke thought Drassel might have disconnected. But then the voice returned, quieter, almost resigned. "What do you want to do, Commander?" Hawke's fingers drummed on the console in front of him, his mind whirling. "I'm going to the heart of their territory. We can't wait for them to strike again. If I can get a clearer picture of their true objectives." "Don't be rash," Drassel cut in, his voice rising in alarm. "This is exactly what they want, an escalation." "Maybe it's what we need," Hawke muttered, more to himself than to the counselor. "I'll need resources. I can't do this alone." Drassel hesitated. "We'll send a fleet. But I'm not sure we can trust the other factions. There are too many who would prefer to keep their distance from this conflict. If you push too hard, you'll alienate them." Hawke's mind snapped back to the present. "I don't have the luxury of choosing allies right now. The Xr'Keth are already forcing the issue. If we don't act decisively, we'll be too late." "Understood," Drassel said quietly. "I'll make preparations for your departure. But be careful, Commander. The Xr'Keth are not as predictable as they once were." Hours later, Hawke stood on the bridge of his sleek cruiser, now armed with more advanced weaponry and support systems, ready to depart for the Xr'Keth's home sector. The stars outside the viewport seemed impossibly distant, as though mocking the fragile peace that had once seemed so permanent. His crew moved about with purpose, setting course for the heart of enemy space. It wasn't a mission he took lightly, but the stakes were clear. They had to confront the Xr'Keth at their strongest, before they could mobilize any further. "Engage the cloaking device," Hawke ordered, his voice cool, even as his pulse raced with the weight of the decision. The ship slipped into the blackness of space, invisible to any scanning systems, a shadow among countless others. The journey took several days, long enough for the looming threat of the Xr'Keth to grow into something that could no longer be ignored. But during those days, Hawke had time to reflect, to consider the cost of their previous decisions, and the consequences that would follow if they failed. For all his expertise, all his years of experience, he was stepping into the unknown, where every move could be the difference between life and death. The first sign of trouble came when they reached the border of the Xr'Keth's domain. Hawke's eyes narrowed as the ship's sensors lit up with incoming signals, too many to track, too many to ignore. "Captain, what's going on?" Hawke's voice was sharp, his command clear. "Multiple ships, Commander. They're moving into our path." "They've detected us," the captain responded, her voice tinged with disbelief. "And there's something else, something larger, off the scale. It's not just a fleet. It's a war machine." Hawke's mind raced. The Xr'Keth had a weapon, something far more dangerous than anything the galaxy had seen before. The war machine on their sensors wasn't just a ship, it was a mobile fortress, a vast and impenetrable force capable of destroying entire systems. "Activate evasive maneuvers," Hawke barked, leaning forward in his chair as the ship's control panel came alive with red alerts. "We need to get a closer look at that war machine. It's the key." As the ship veered sharply to avoid enemy fire, Hawke's eyes locked onto the display, tracking the silhouette of the war machine. It was a massive structure, bristling with weapons and defensive capabilities. Its sheer size alone was staggering, and the thought that something this powerful was in the hands of the Xr'Keth sent a chill through him. The ship's AI spoke up again. "Commander, I'm detecting a vulnerable point, an energy core on the war machine's lower hull. If we can target that, we might be able to disable it long enough to get in." Hawke's lips twisted into a grim smile. "Do it. No half measures." The next few moments were a blur. Hawke's ship danced through enemy fire, taking hit after hit but maintaining its cloaking signature long enough to remain undetected. He could hear the ship's hull groaning under the pressure as they closed in on the war machine. "Targeting system locked," the weapons officer called out. "Ready to fire on your mark." Hawke's voice was cold and deliberate. "Fire." The ship's main guns unleashed a torrent of energy, sending powerful beams into the Xr'Keth war machine's energy core. The first volley missed, but the second struck true. For a moment, everything seemed to freeze, and then the war machine exploded in a blinding flash of light. Hawke felt the shockwave ripple through the ship, but he didn't flinch. He was too focused on the next step. "Full speed ahead," Hawke ordered. "We're going in." Inside the war machine, chaos erupted. The explosion had left the Xr'Keth reeling, and now Hawke's ship slipped through the hole they'd made, cutting through the heart of the machine with surgical precision. It was a risky move, one that would put them right in the path of the Xr'Keth's most powerful forces, but Hawke knew they didn't have time for a drawn-out battle. As they reached the central command hub of the war machine, Hawke's team fought their way through waves of Xr'Keth soldiers. The alien warriors were fierce, their insectoid forms quick and deadly, but the Terran crew was better trained, more resilient. Together, they pushed forward, clearing each room with brutal efficiency. Finally, they reached the command center, a massive, circular chamber at the core of the war machine. Inside, the Xr'Keth's leaders waited, poised and calculating, their alien eyes gleaming with malicious intent. "Commander Hawke," one of them hissed, its voice a chilling sound of insectoid rasp. "You've come to stop us. But you do not understand. This is only the beginning. The galaxy has no future without us." Hawke's gaze was unwavering. "The future doesn't belong to you. It never did." With a swift motion, Hawke signaled his team to advance. The battle that followed was fierce, but in the end, the Xr'Keth were defeated, their war machine disabled, and their leaders taken into custody. As Hawke stood amidst the wreckage, the last of the Xr'Keth's forces neutralized, he reflected on the consequences of their actions. The galaxy had been on the brink of destruction, and now, for the first time in years, it felt as though there was hope. But the war was far from over. The Xr'Keth had just been one enemy in a much larger struggle. And as he looked out over the stars, Hawke knew one thing for certain: the galaxy had learned its lesson. The Terrans were not to be ignored. Their role in this universe was crucial, whether the galaxy liked it or not. And with that realization, Commander Aiden Hawke turned to face whatever new challenges lay ahead, knowing that the fight for the galaxy's future was only just beginning.